Welcome to Take From It What You Will, where we talk about current events of the day. I want to run through a few scenarios today that have occurred to me concerning the upcoming elections. First of all, I want to clarify something about primaries that people seem to be misunderstanding. Certainly the mainstream media is hyping it and missing the whole point of a primary. Remember, primaries are where and the party conventions are where parties pick their candidates, not elect their candidates. They select their candidates. The system of that selection has been changed through the years, depending on the party. It does not indicate a certain person cannot run. It just indicates who that party is backing. So it's not an election. The person who wins in the primary is selected in the primary process, is not holding an office. They're vying for an office, and they're being backed by that political party. They can use whatever methods they wish. So this concept that they need to be elected. Now, of course, if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, you don't care for the person who's selected, you are free to vote for whoever you wish come the general election. You're free to change parties. Similarly, if you are a candidate and running for a certain office, you are free to run for that office. You just may not be selected by that party to run for that office. So again, it's not an election, it's a selection process, and this has been changed throughout the years. So please, people, understand that. It just burns me up when I see the media go after this like the people have spoken. Well, the people haven't spoken. In fact, it's a party selection process. Yes, those parties have the money, they have the power. That gets into a whole nother kettle of fish of campaign finance and campaign finance reform, which I think we certainly need tons of. We need to model ourselves, in my opinion, and this is an opinion, state it right there, I try not to do opinions, this is an opinion. In my opinion, we'd be better off fashioning our elections like some other countries, such as Canada, where you have 5 weeks prior to the election, you do your campaign, or whatever it is, if it's 8 weeks. And there's a limit of $1 million, or whatever that limit is, but it's not this billions and billions of dollars being poured into campaigns for 2 years prior to the election. This just smacks of banana republic politics, which is some kind of a holdover from really the 50s. Anyway, I want to go into a couple of scenarios, though, that have crossed my mind. And I'm not saying these are likely. I'm not putting any percentages on them. But there are 4 or 5 different scenarios that could come up come convention time that I think are interesting to contemplate. Number one, I think the most obvious is there's no doubt Hillary Clinton will be the Democratic candidate. I think the Republican candidate is a little more up in the air. But no matter who that is, I think Hillary Clinton has a very, very good chance, odds are, of being the next president. Now, let's say my, again, opinion is Barack Obama does not want to leave the White House. He does not want to leave power. He wants to be in the workings. And I'm sure that the concern would come about that Barack Obama will have very little influence once he leaves office on the Clintons, other than the power he can bring to bear. But the Clintons have a heck of a lot of power behind them as well. So I think he would see that as diminished. It could be, and this is scenario number 1, if you call it, if you want to call it, Hillary Clinton wins the election. But because of terrorist activity and perhaps other military action that's going on. I'm going to get to another scenario in a little bit. What's going on with the Russians flying low over one of our ships? The Chinese, the way they're saber rattling in the the South China Sea, the Koreans that are saber rattling. This combined with what's going on with the Chinese, in my opinion, backing Shias, the Russians backing Sunnis in the Middle East, is essentially taking the Western world out of that scenario, and is making them that power. And I think what you could see would be a military jump between the Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians in an uncomfortable kind of an alliance that would then become the major actors in this world. Anyway, let's get back to our scenario one with Hillary Clinton being elected, and then perhaps Barack Obama, due to military reasons, either postponing the election and so she doesn't actually get the win, or postponing the validation of the results, or for some military reason, if the saber rattling gets worse, declaring martial law, and then maybe pushing towards an indictment for Hillary Clinton on the email scandal, which is going to just disappear anyway, unless it's useful to the Obamas. And he tries to stay in office. That scenario, I love that scenario. I mean, we should make a movie about that. Scenario number one: Hillary Clinton then is fighting. They're fighting in the Supreme Court, which is now neck and neck, tied, and the results of that could go on for months and months with Barack Obama staying in as president, while Hillary Clinton battles the legalistic, and of course the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Middle Eastern factions all taking advantage of this to grab power around the world. It won't be an attack on the U.S., but they'll grab power and diminish the power of the U.S. And total chaos. The U.S. goes into an economic meltdown, along with Western Europe going into economic meltdown because the euro and their inability for the European community to respond to problems. I mean, they have negative interest rates. Finally, the euro collapses. Total chaos would ensue once the dollar has dropped its power. Apocalyptic, I know. That's number one. Option number two. We're into, again, through the primary seasons. Let's say Hillary Clinton, through superdelegates, wins the nomination, which she is going to do. But Bernie Sanders supporters become so disenchanted with the Democratic Party that they push Bernie to run as an independent. He would draw a lot of votes away from Hillary. Again, this is a scenario. This is a scenario. I'm not saying it's likely to happen. On the other side, Ted Cruz, or one of the others, through the Republican convention, doesn't get enough delegates, and in a contested convention, someone other than Trump becomes the nominee. Trump, becoming disenchanted, starts a second campaign, an independent campaign for president. And so now you have four candidates, two independents, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and two party candidates in Hillary Clinton and in, say, Ted Cruz or whoever it could be. It could end up being Marco Rubio for all we know. But whoever that would be, and then you'd have Hillary and Bernie and Ted and Don kind of movie going on, and who knows who would win. The whole thing goes to the Supreme Court because because of perhaps some voter fraud problems in the Maine election goes to account. Everything goes to the Supreme Court. Again, the Supreme Court is deadlocked, and Barack Obama stays as president of the United States. This is scenario number two. Scenario number three would be that we have Hillary Clinton elected as president because of the weakened state of the military, because of what's happened in the 8 years prior, and the weakened stature of the United States, where we've said we don't want to be the policeman of the world anymore, which is something I really want to get into as well. And so the Russians, the Chinese continue their interventions. The Chinese are intervening in the Middle East. I guarantee you, they're the ones who are roundabout way buying oil from the terrorist groups, and they're probably using gold to do it because of all their purchases of gold. Yet they state they have none in their treasury. QED, they're using gold to trade for oil with the terrorist groups in the Middle East. And so weakens the U.S. stature that now the global powers become eventually the Chinese and the Russians who will have this uneasy Cold War between them, and the U.S. is relegated to a kind of a European, Canadian, and without the stability of the dollar, the capitalist Western world goes into a huge depression, bigger than any world depression we've seen before, and probably you're going to see a lot of in Europe, you're definitely going to see a lot of the countries become isolationist. They're going to reset their borders. The European Union, the Euro would fall apart. The Schengen alliances would fall apart. What you would see would be very conservative organizations along the lines of what perhaps people think of Donald Trump in the U.S., the right-wing conservatives. I'm not saying he is anything like that. I'm just saying what he's envisioned as by most of the media, cropping up in Europe and seeing again tensions starting to rage in the stands and in southeastern Europe, where most of the conflict has started traditionally in the conflicts in Europe, and you'll see that spread. A strong anti-Muslim sentiment, and then conflagration in Europe, and who knows what the outcome could finally be. Very isolationist strategy taken by the U.S. and perhaps Canada, and a very, very deep depression throughout the world, and especially in the United States. Armageddon, another terrible, terrible scenario of what could happen here. But I think of all these scenarios, the most likely that's going to happen is we're going to see that Hillary Clinton is going to be our next president. That, to me, is the most likely. I am not a Hillary Clinton. I'm not backing any presidential candidate at this point. To me, the best presidential candidate would be an amalgamation of parts of all of them that I like. But I don't see any one candidate that actually fits what I would call a proper what this country needs to turn it around. So there you go. Those are the scenarios that I wanted to put to you. Now, I want to touch a bit on these provocations because I think this is important. I think the military provocations are going on are directly related to the United States, and most of our political candidates saying we can't be even in the Republicans, we are not the policemen of the world. Well, as a matter of fact, we are the policemen of the world de facto. It's a banner we accepted while World War II was being fought, and before we entered, it was something that Roosevelt tacitly, Churchill overtly referred to, that by bringing in the power of the United States of America. They were handing the mantle of world freedom over to the American giant. I'm paraphrasing, but Churchill did refer to this several times in public, that this mantle that the British had, the sun never sets on the British Empire, the de facto responsibility which the British handled extremely well for decades, if not centuries, of maintaining peace around the world, very effectively, was handed over to the Americans, which of course we've totally botched and we don't recognize even as a responsibility anymore. So, all right, if we're going to hand over that mantle of responsibility for world freedom, and for the American way of life, the Western way of life, who do we hand it over to? There is really no one ready to take that mantle. And really these kind of changes only occur in conflict. So I think in conflict we will see conflict. When that occurs, we'll have to see who is going to accept that mantle. Is it going to be China? Is it going to be Russia? My guess is it would be China, who would be the next dominant world player, and then again would open up either a Cold War or a de facto war between the Russians and the Chinese, who would battle over domination of, again, the Middle Eastern areas and the oil, and then other resources around the world. With the U.S., it's not a matter. It's very unlikely there would be any attacks on the U.S. What it would turn into would be something similar to Canada, Europe, where, yes, we do have power. We do have some economic power, but our military power would diminish, and we would no longer be, again, the policemen of the world, which we say we don't want to be. And if we don't want to be it, we need to be able to hand that mantle over to someone responsibly. My fear is there is no one out there responsible enough to be able to take that mantle on at this point that would be capable of following interests of the United States. Well, I think that about wraps it up for what I want to talk about today. I've tried to keep this a little shorter. I know I don't get a lot of views, probably a lot of it because I ramble on so much, but I tried to keep this under 20 minutes. I hope you'll look this over. Please make sure to make comments. If I'm always interested in people opining on what I think. Again, I'm not making any kind of predictions. I'm just saying here are some potential scenarios out there that could occur because we're at such a delicate crossroads here. And that crossroads is not a crossroads that leads in 2 different directions or even 4 different directions. There's a dozen different directions or more that things could go in. But very few of them are good ones. And I'm afraid to keep the good ones, what America would think of as good ones, we need, as America and the Western world, to man up and to show power where we need to show power. Thank you, and take from it what you will.